Joining us today, retired U.S. Army Colonel Jon Sweet and Foreign Affairs Analyst Mark Toth. Welcome to our program.
Hey, Daniel and Sofia, thank you for having us back on the show.
Daniel, Sofia, great to be here. Thank you.
The United States considers sending Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine and has already allowed some strikes deep inside Russia, according to General Kit Kellogg, U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine. Colonel Sweet, what could this add to the ongoing Ukraine's campaign against Russia's oil refining capacity?
Sure. Look, the Tomahawk missile certainly brings another element, another tool, if you will, to the toolbox of weapon systems that Ukraine has at its disposal now to target Russian targets obviously within the interior of Russia. I would see the Tomahawk missile being used more for military targets. And when I say military targets, I mean airfields, troop formations, headquarters, while the drones that Ukraine has in their arsenal and the other weapon systems they have would still be used more for some of the strategic targets, being the oil refineries, and those type of systems would be used obviously to shut down their capacity to refine the oil and to sell it. So again, it's just another tool in the toolbox, but it's a very effective precision deep strike weapon system, again, that would be used against military targets in the interior of Russia.
Do you expect the Trump's administration to finally provide Ukraine with such long-range missiles? And if they do so, could this become a game changer, putting more pressure on Putin's war machine and his logistics?
Sure. So it does serve two purposes. The first, again, is the precision deep strike capability, but the other is the messaging. The messaging to Putin is this. We're going to provide these type of weapon systems so Ukraine can target those systems that you're using to target them. And there will be a cost associated with you continuing your weapons, your ballistic missile strikes and drone strikes against Ukrainian civilians. And this is the bill payer, the Tomahawk missile. In addition to the other capabilities, this is a precision deep strike capability that will cost Putin assets deep within the interior of Russia.
Mark, recently Russia's dictator spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that these statements, publications about Tomahawk cruise missiles were really serious and they were analyzing this information. Could this keep Vladimir Putin up at night, this possibility of providing Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine? And another question, do you see this as a bargaining chip from the US, just leverage over Vladimir Putin, or a real plan to provide Ukraine with such deep striking capability to help Ukraine to actually change the outcome of this war?
Yeah, Daniel, let me take the second question first here. Definitely it's messaging from the White House, because you've got J.D. Vance coming out, someone who's not that much for doing foreign assistance in terms of military aspects of it. And he's out there signaling that this very well is, could be the case, it's under consideration. So clearly they're trying to message to Putin, look, we're getting serious about this. We've run out of patience, and you better start responding to it. So there's that element to it, as John was just mentioning. In terms of its overall effect and whether it's keeping Putin up at night, I suspect it is. And I was thinking about this earlier this morning. If we really step back, I think we've had a tendency so far in this war to think of it as a static campaign in the east and south of Ukraine. But in reality, there's many, many domains that are not so static. When you look at the Black Sea, the taking down of the Black Sea fleet, forcing them to flee Sevastopol as their headquarters. That's one domain that's been diminished, somewhat checkmated. And that had real implications, right? Because early in this war, we were all concerned about, could Odessa be next? Could movements also from Odessa affect Transnistria and ultimately Moldova? So that's one domain that's been affected. Yet another domain, obviously, was just going into Kursk. This idea of Russian sanctuary went away. Suddenly they had to defend their interior lines. They had to dedicate troops to that. That's another domain that Ukraine has done an exceptional job of taking away. And yet, this big one, the big enchilada, if you will, that we're seeing. I'd add also real quickly, one other domain is just air superiority over over Ukraine itself. That's another thing that the Ukrainians have taken away. But if you look at the big one, it is the oil and energy infrastructure. That's yet another domain that is really starting to collapse around Putin. And the Tomahawks, are just yet one more domain on top of all of these domains that Ukraine is making this war not so static in ways that maybe some of us missed initially. So, the answer is yes, he's going to lose sleep.
And also, surprisingly, US President Donald Trump says that Ukraine could retake all territories taken by the Russian side. Do you feel that this is major Donald Trump's U-turn on Ukraine, or just another tool for negotiations, another point of pressure on Vladimir Putin and his inner circle?
Yeah, the jury's out real quick, Daniel, here. I think in terms of what Trump is trying to accomplish with Putin, is still in the messaging phase. He's trying to say, look, he's had enough. He's trying to get Putin to think about what his cost calculus is. Does he want some gains? Does he want to lose it all? And now Trump's trying to land that message. But, in my mind, time will tell. It's just too early to say if what Trump means is specific and designed to say, look, I've had enough. We're going to be in this until Ukraine wins, or if it's just about getting Putin to say, this is it, come to the table now, or it's going to get really bad for you.
And also, Sofia, could continue our discussions about the recent statement made by J.D. Vance.
Vice President J.D. Vance says Russia has recently refused both bilateral talks with Ukraine and trilateral meetings with the U.S., urging Moscow to wake up and actually face the reality of heavy losses on the front line. Colonel Sweet, from your military standpoint, what does this tell us about their capabilities and morale, and why they are avoiding these negotiations?
Well, they're avoiding negotiations because their end state, quite frankly, is the capitulation in Ukraine. And Putin has made that evident. He has no intention of negotiating. He has no intention of stopping the war. He's reaching out to his allies, if you will, North Korea, China, and Iran, to continue funding him, to continue providing him weapon systems, and continue to provide him soldiers to fight the fight. He believes that he can win through a battle of attrition. He believes that he can outwill NATO. And what he's also trying to do, obviously, is to get NATO to turn inward on itself. So we're seeing these intrusions into NATO airspace, but it's actually having the exact opposite effect of what he wants, because NATO has coalesced and come back together. They've formed the Eastern Central Air Policing. They have NATO patrols now in the Baltic Sea that are interdicting Russian vessels that have been in the past threatening undersea cables. So it's actually had the exact opposite effect on NATO, just like his invasion had the exact opposite effect on NATO also, whereas, Sweden and Finland ended up joining the alliance. So his moves are actually causing effects that he does not intend.
Unidentified drones have been spotted over northern countries recently, last week and in the beginning of this week, including Denmark, flying above military sites in these countries. The government has not shot them down, but they also say that these drones did not appear from Russia. Mark, how do you see the situation, and what do you expect happen next, especially taking into account the meeting with European leaders in Denmark this week?
Right. I think Europe has to realize that if they don't start interdicting these drones and taking them down, it's only going to get worse. You're just greenlighting what Putin is trying to accomplish. And again, because he's getting defeated on different domains in this war, to keep kind of hammering that point, this is yet another domain that he's trying to establish, one to push NATO to try to get them to back down in Ukraine. And he's doing this through hybrid warfare. I think the jury's still out. Who is actually behind these drones? Zelensky has his theories that they're being launched from shadow fleets that Russia's using in the Baltic Sea. That's a potential, high likelihood there. And so it's going to keep happening unless they do it, in terms of start shooting these things down or sending strong missiles that we're not going to put up with it. So hopefully as the leaders gather in Copenhagen, they basically say, look, we've had enough. We're not going to yield this domain to Putin. This is not going to work as distraction from the war in Ukraine, and start to deny this domain to him.
President Donald Trump said NATO countries could shoot down Russian aircraft violating NATO airspace, sparking a debate among European leaders, including France and Finland, who oppose such measures. Colonel Sweet, I have a question for you from a military point. What's your take? Should NATO take this step, and what kind of consequences and potential risks we can see?
Sure, it should be the next step. And Mark said it precisely, that unless you stop it, it will continue. They will continue to push that envelope. They will go further and further in with different types of systems, drones. We've seen helicopters in Estonia, and we've seen jet fighters violate the sovereign, if you will, NATO air, the terrain. So it is an issue, and it has to be addressed. Now, whether or not they shoot those aircraft and drones down over NATO territory shouldn't be the issue. That's sovereign territory, and those aircraft shouldn't be there. The question is, do you shoot those aircraft down as they're approaching NATO territory over Kaliningrad or over Belarus? I don't think that's going to happen. But the protocols right now that are established for NATO air forces to interdict those aircraft must be addressed, because protocols will slow down the process of reacting, which put NATO jet pilots at risk if they have to ask permission from NATO headquarters to engage in aircraft. So the protocol is going to have to be working, but I do think they're going to start engaging these targets as they enter the NATO territory.
Mark, I would like to discuss with you further these violations of NATO's airspace. According to today's publication by The Telegraph, NATO could step up in support to Ukraine, and also could step up in intercepting Russia's air assets, and could deploy or at least participate in such air policing zone over the west of Ukraine to intercept these missiles, drones over Ukrainian airspace. What are the chances for this plan to be imposed, enforced? And don't you also think that they're using this threat of a no-fly zone just as another bargaining chip for negotiations with Vladimir Putin?
Daniel, my sense is that it's more than just a bargaining chip from Europe's perspective. From my sources that are in Poland, et cetera, they're deeply rattled by this. I think the war that you know all too well, sitting in Lviv or with Sofia in Kyiv, is that it's very real. The consequences are real. And now Poland feels that, Estonia feels that, Romania has felt that, and they want real teeth to this. And the reality is you can create a drone war. A drone wall, as Ursula von der Leyen is suggesting that they do. But unless that drone wall extends into Ukraine, starts interdicting these missiles before they even reach NATO airspace, it's not going to be effective. It's going to require a multi-layered approach. So I think from their perspective, look, get it done. This is something that they have to stop talking about, and they need to start implementing. John and I have long advocated for an air shield, at least in Western Ukraine. And now there's all the more reason to do it because of these, fighter jet and drone incursions into NATO airspace.
And don't you feel that Trump's administration has just walked away from this big situation, tensions around Russia's drones invading Polish, Estonian airspace? What is your assessment of current stance of White House right now?
Right. There's two ways to look at two schools of thought here. One, that he is just walking away, that he's lost interest because he can't get Putin to agree on peace on his terms. There's another school of thought, though. Time will tell. The historians will write this. That what he's trying to do is to get Europe to act more on its own, to start funding its own defense, to start taking that seriously, and to start making sure that they're implementing these type of programs as opposed to just relying on the U.S. to do it. Now, obviously, my preference, I'm sure John's as well, would be that we do this jointly, but that's just not going to happen. So at this point, maybe I'm a little bit Pollyanna here, but I'm wishing that it's just more to get Europe to act, and that's what's behind Trump's motivations. But time will tell. We just can't make that assessment yet.
Also, Ukraine continues its deep strikes inside Russian territory on Russia's oil refining capacity, even using long-range so-called Neptune missiles, Ukrainian drones and other important tools. Mark, let's cover current effects of this strike, because this campaign continues despite Vladimir Putin's decision to improve Russia's air defense asset, his so-called national security briefings, which are held almost every day. Russia fails to deter Ukraine from attacking Russia with so-called long-range drones. Right now, Russia is facing a growing fuel crisis, with about 1 in 50 gas stations shutting down in the past 2 months, according to Ukrainian intelligence. Also, that's a drop of 360 stations. And right now, shortages have reached Moscow and nearby many Russian regions. There is also big fuel disaster in occupied Crimea right now. Mark, for how long can Putin sustain this intensified drone attacks on Russia's oil refining capacity, and for how long can Russia's oil refining capacity sustain this?
Yeah, Daniel, it's a great question. That one requires a bit of a crystal ball, because dictators are very good about keeping control of the countries. But I will say this, look, it's had a huge effect. When we talked last week, 18% or so of Russia's oil refinery capabilities were estimated to have been hit and damaged. Now this week, 7 days later, it's 25%. You've got $65 million, dollars worth of, or million barrels a day that are not reaching the front lines, not reaching production facilities to produce weapons and domestic needs and the like. You've got consumer prices skyrocketing 40%. The impact is really real. And I was kind of thinking back earlier, as I was collecting my notes for today's segment, was that this is not so different than what the British naval blockade of Germany was in World War I. It had, a real impact in terms of what was otherwise a static war. It caused fuel shortages in Germany, food shortages, et cetera. It led to what's infamously known as the turnip winter in 1916-17. And this really does have the potential, and I'll try to brand this Ukrainian sunflower winter of 2025 in terms of just how badly it's affecting Russia. And I think we shouldn't forget, just one other quick point here, that, there's this cliche that Russia is just basically a gas station, right? That's all the country is. That's what its economy is built around. And to the extent that Russia, Ukraine keeps attacking that gas station, if you will, and degrading it, that's all the better. And that's just an incredible domain that Ukraine continues to win. And another reason why I'm starting to think this isn't as static of a war as maybe we thought, that maybe there's a lot more movement that we need to give credence to. And Ukrainians proving that, to say, hey, we're winning none of the domains, pay attention.
Over the last weekend, Ukraine faced a heavy attack, heavy drone and missile attack from Russia, and Russia, as usual, attacked peace cities and civilians. President Zelensky says Kyiv will continue striking back to Russia and striking back to Russian oil refineries to push it toward diplomacy. Colonel Sweet, from your perspective, what do you expect Kyiv's next moves to be?
So I think Kyiv has to do three things. They have to, one, stop the bleeding. Okay, when I say stop the bleeding, they have to establish that air defense network and deny Russia the ability to strike their targets with ballistic missiles and drones. Okay, so that involves defensive capabilities, but that also involves striking deep into Russia to strike those airfields from which those bombers are taken off from, to strike those ballistic missile facilities where they build those missiles. So it's offensive and defense. They have to stop the bleeding. Next thing they have to do is stop the flow of Russian forces that are coming into Ukraine. They could continue killing 1,000 Russians a day, but if 1,000 more Russians show up tomorrow, it's a zero-sum game. So interdiction is critical. And the third piece that you just talked about is they have to stop the funding. And that means continuing to strike those oil refineries and those liquid natural gas refineries and deny Russia the funds that they need to continue funding their war against Ukraine. there will come a time in which China, North Korea, and Iran will stop providing support if the money dries up. It's all about money sometimes. As Mark said, they're running out of money, and those attacks are having an effect. And also, the last thing I would say, in addition to the effects that it's having on the Russian people, let's turn now again to what stopped the war in Afghanistan. It's the Russian mothers. The mothers that protested against Moscow for the loss of 15,000 lives in Afghanistan are the same mothers now who have been mostly quiet over the loss of 1.1 million casualties in Russia today.
President Trump has voiced support for Ukrainian strikes on Russian energy infrastructure. Mark, do you think we could see some blackouts in Russian cities this autumn and winter?
We can hope, look, because blackouts, obviously will have a human cost to it, civilian cost, but at the same time, this is war, and blackouts also interrupt production of munitions, weapons, and what Russia needs to keep its economy afloat. And I think something that, Zelensky said best, that these strikes against Russia's oil and energy infrastructure are better than sanctions. It really is what's crippling them. So, if we're seeing blackouts, if that's happening, that just shows you that these attacks, these strikes are getting much more effective. And I hope that they do, because this is a domain that Ukraine is starting to win, and they need to win it decisively. And I hope, I don't wish human suffering on anyone on either side of this war, but the blackouts would be a very good thing to see.
And also, I would like to ask you some summarizing last questions. Colonel Sweet, you just mentioned about the so-called mothers of Russia that forced the previous Russia's administration, USSR government to stop the war in Afghanistan. Do you feel that there is social pressure in Russia that is growing up right now regarding the high casualties in this war? Some analysts say Putin has 6-12 months ahead to continue his war, but he doesn't have another years. What is your take on that, with this current rate of losses, and can Russia sustain this for another, several years ahead if Putin refuses to settle?
I'm not sure they can sustain it for another several years. Now, they can man it. They can clearly reach within the Russian population and continue sending young men to their deaths in Ukraine. So that they can do. But mass isn't going to win this war, because modern technology today defeats mass. I do think the Russian mothers can play a role as they continue to protest the war and the loss of their children, and also those wounded soldiers that are coming back into Russian society will have to be cared for. So it's going to put a strain. But the Russian population has a history of tolerating massive amounts, if you will, of suffering. So I think we're getting there. I think when you look at the polls, and whatever polling means in Russia, but there has been a downward slide from 100%, maybe down to the 80s. And I think I saw a poll that said 80% or 75% of the Russian population favored a negotiated into the war. So it's going to continue to have an effect. The more suffering, if you will, when I say suffering, the lack of food, the lack of water, the lack of energy, as you go into a winter months, particularly in Russia, it's going to have an impact. So to continue the assault that Ukraine is doing against the oil refineries is having a positive impact, at least on Ukraine's ability to continue fighting.
Also, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says that this war would be finished by negotiations. Colonel Sweet, is he right? Do you expect any kind of a ceasefire deal or temporary peace this or next year? Where this war is heading right now?
It may very well end in negotiations, but I don't believe it's going to end in negotiations within the next 6 to 12 months. Just because, again, Putin feels as though he has the financial backing from external sources. He believes he has the weaponry that he needs from external sources, and he knows he can pull from the current population. He believes, again, that he can outlast NATO's will and that he can intimidate NATO through other means. But again, as I said earlier, his current courses of action, which are trying to affect elections like in Moldova, failed, and trying to intimidate NATO through air incursions of their space has been countered and has actually brought NATO closer together once again in the defense of the alliance. So we will see. Time will tell. But I think eventually he either comes to the negotiation table or he is removed from power.
Thank you, Colonel Sweet and Mark Toth, for your time and for joining us today. And I wish you to have a nice day. Glory to Ukraine.
Hey, Daniel and Sofia, thanks for having us back on the show.
Daniel, Sofia, thank you. Take care.